everybody, and thank you for the invitation and accepting my proposal. What I wanted to start off with was that, as Penny mentioned, my first pre-sessional course was face-to-face last year, and as with many tutors, this was our first time of delivering an EAP course remotely, and I was very interested to see the sort of challenges my fellow tutors encountered during their pre-sessional course, online pre-sessional course. And so I decided to undertake some action research. And before I have a look at the action research itself and the findings, I want to give a bit of context to what our setup was at the university. And we decided to deliver an 8-week online pre-sessional course for students all over the world, China, Thailand, and various other countries. And traditionally, in a face-to-face setting, it was a 10-week extended, a 10-week course or a 5-week intensive pre-sessional course, depending on student levels. Now, with the online setting, it was 8 weeks, and we decided to use, or the conveners decided to use Zoom to have some synchronous catch-up sessions. So these sessions were aimed for students to ask questions about self-study or topics that they had a look at. And there were also individual tutorials, one-to-one tutorials with students via Zoom. There was a seminar discussion and live assessments throughout the course. Usually during the week, we had 2 catch-up sessions, a seminar discussion, and occasionally throughout the course, individual tutorials and live assessments, which was speaking predominantly with Zoom. Now, we had our own, I can't remember the term, but we had a sort of environment for students to encounter with Canvas for asynchronous self-study activities and a variety of activities for students to access. And there were lectures, recorded lectures, and presentations for students to listen to, and then return to the catch-up sessions with any questions that they had or discussions in their own breakout rooms. We also used Canvas for assessments, so reading and writing. And we also used Canvas for class announcements. The tutors used it quite actively during the week with regards to Zoom links and that sort of thing for their groups. And then finally, there was MS Teams, and staff utilized this for communication. So it was a nice environment for staff to share ideas or presentations with each other. And then we used Teams for weekly meetings to see how everybody was getting on. So that was the context of what was organized for the online pre-sessional course. Now, at the beginning of the course, I decided to email out surveys to different tutors or all tutors on the course. And I wanted to find out a bit more about the challenges that these tutors encountered. And I asked 4 open questions. The first question, what 3 challenges did you encounter during the 8-week pre-sessional course? The second, what strategies did you implement to tackle those 3 challenges? What skills are required to be an online EAP tutor post-COVID-19? And what advice would you have given yourself at the beginning of the course? And I was very interested to find out whether the challenges that my colleagues encountered were the sort of challenges that I faced as well. Anyway, I want to have a look at the first question that I asked tutors and the sort of challenges that they encountered. And there were the usual challenges that they encountered, such as getting used to working from home, so being in their home environment and trying to convert their home environment into an office, I suppose. The third point related to that was the technical update. So being in that home environment and understanding a bit more about Zoom and Teams and the Canvas, the different tools that were available for tutors and students. And then the second point was to ensure that students were speaking English in their breakout rooms. The fourth point, some tutors found that the amount of written work was more substantial to mark. The fifth point was about no staff room being available and colleagues, colleague-to-colleague discussions being limited to some extent, and that face-to-face interaction, which was limited. The next point, monitoring student progress and engagement remotely. And this was quite an interesting challenge for myself personally as well, to try and see how students were engaging with their self-study remotely. The final point, establishing levels of engagement with students from the reduced contact time with the live sessions that we had. Anyway, so those were the main points that were raised with the surveys that I received. And the next part of the survey was, what sort of strategies did you implement to tackle these challenges? And so, for example, getting used to working from home, one tutor said, my preferred strategy from working from home was to often work on and off rather than fixed blocked hours. So having that flexibility to walk away from their computer, I suppose, and to switch off and get that time away from sitting in front of a screen, rather than sitting for an extended period of time in front of the screen. The second point, making sure students speak English in breakout rooms. So that was one of the challenges. And different tutors said, well, I highlighted the importance for them to learn conversational skills. So explaining to students why it's important for them to interact remotely in English. Another tutor said, I provided very structured expressions for them to use in conversation, I suppose in remote conversation, or these sort of functional expressions which help develop the conversation in an online environment. And then another tutor said that I prompted them to ask opinions of others, so to follow up on what others had said. Now, the next challenge, technical update. One tutor said, well, it was just a case of trying things out, making progress whilst making mistakes. So it's quite an interesting point there. So that a tutor said, well, mistakes are going to happen, but you have to try and make that progress during the course and understand, well, you'll learn from the mistakes, and it's very important to make that progress and reflect on what you've done. The second point was about the NILE course, and what was suggested for all tutors as part of an induction process was to undertake an online course, so how to teach remotely, and NILE were offering this, and it was free when I undertook it. So this one tutor said, well, the NILE course helped by making it seem possible to teach remotely. The third point was that practical help through our IT department was available. So they helped tutors that were having any sort of IT issues, whether it was from the students' point of contact or whether it was a tutor's point of contact. And they offered some suggestions and best practice with regards to either tutors or students. Another piece of advice was just practicing with colleagues beforehand and developing that familiarity with it. And a variety of different colleagues decided, well, it's very new, teaching through Zoom, and they're going to create these sort of induction processes and, peer-to-peer support with regards to the technology involved. And then the final point reiterated that. So there was great support from more technical colleagues, and different colleagues were willing to share their input or their advice or their experiences. So that was very interesting to see. The next part about a substantial amount of written work being to mark, a tutor said, well, spreading this marking made the tasks less onerous and more manageable. So again, rather than just sitting down for a block set of hours, just trying to go through and making tasks more manageable, and having that flexibility to work remotely. The next point, the next challenge, no staff room available and colleague discussions being limited. A tutor said, and as I've mentioned, a tutor said that they made sure that they attended weekly staff meetings on Teams. And I think this was very important, so that staff members, other tutors could share what went well, what didn't go well, what they would improve for next time. And these weekly staff meetings generated a sort of environment to say, well, although we're working remotely, it's we're all in the same position and we're all here to help you. So the weekly staff meetings were vital, and it's nice to see that my colleague mentioned that. Another colleague said phone calls and messages with 2 or 3 colleagues to make our own mini support bubbles. So that was good that colleagues were helping each other. The next challenge, monitoring student progress, engagement remotely, and establishing levels of engagement with students. And what was interesting, that a tutor was sending out comprehensive reminders and reviews, and I'll touch upon this a bit later. Another colleague said, I used the tutorials, so the one-to-one tutorials, to check on students whose performance in the breakout room suggests that they were either coasting and not really doing or engaging with the course. And another tutor said, well, following what the students had done, so doing the course themselves, accessing the recorded presentations, allowed that tutor to assess whether the students had done the asynchronous sessions and activities of self-study as well. Okay. All right, now moving on to the next part of my presentation. What skills are required to be an online EAP tutor post-COVID-19? And the skills required, one teacher suggested, well, you need to have decent computer skills, and not just with Zoom, but more basic things than that. And I suppose how to upload documents, how to email students, and the basic things that maybe more technologically competent tutors take for granted. So I think that's an interesting point that one tutor made. The skill of giving students confidence to speak in an online class and answer questions in front of others. So it's quite an interesting point. Maybe a little bit more needs to look into this. So how can you give the students confidence to speak in an online environment, and how do you give those students space so that they can negotiate that speaking and the questioning in front of others? The third point, adaptability, empathy, compassion. I suppose that encompasses both teacher or tutor to tutor, and tutor to student, student to student, student to tutor as well. Greater emphasis on IT skills, making use of initiative in ways of presenting material. The motivation to deal with strange timings, and as the majority of our students were from Southeast Asia, they were ahead of us from the UK. And so some tutors were waking up just a bit earlier, delivering the synchronous sessions, and also giving yourself a break when it's too much. So again, having the regular breaks, getting away from the screen time, and ensuring that you try and switch off as much as possible. The next point, imagination, to put yourself in the shoes of some rather lost feeling students. So I guess with online learning and teaching, that remoteness really sort of looks into how remote students may feel, as well as how remote the tutors are feeling, and that sense of being lost or negotiating through the course together. And also logistics, organisation and planning are all more important than ever. And I'll have a look at this in a moment. Okay, and then the final point, what advice would you have given yourself at the beginning of the course? So sort of a self-reflection on, okay, I've done the course now. I could see the challenges. What would I have told myself at the beginning? The first suggestion, you'll get used to the tech. So don't worry if it seems overwhelming. You'll get used to the technology. Share with your students the fact that this is a new way of working, and it's not possible for you to suddenly know everything as a tutor. And I think this is a very important point. You need to be very honest with the students to say, well, actually, I'm not entirely sure about this. Does anyone have any suggestions? Or I've got a technical issue. Any more competent students can help me, and then trying to get student support or understanding that way. Another tutor said, as a lot of the asynchronous self-study activities were presentations and self-access, one tutor suggested maybe teaching more content in live catch-up sessions, particularly essay writing skills and grammatical accuracy. The next advice that was suggested was to ask them, the students, to come to class with a question in mind, particularly with seminar discussions. So they would have watched a lecture or a pre-recorded lecture, and then come into the live session, and then students were given the space to interact and share their notes and their opinions with each other. So asking the students to come to that class with a question in mind, and telling them that you'll ask questions randomly and expect an answer from them. The next point, enjoy the autonomy that you have with your catch-up sessions, and encourage the students to have autonomy as well. I suppose because the course is delivered remotely, there's that sense that, or there's that trust placed on tutors that the course will be delivered as expected, and many of the tutors reacted to how their students were engaging and negotiating the course, and that autonomy, I suppose, with an online environment is essential. And the final thing, allow extra time, because as we probably are all aware remotely, that things can take much longer than you expect. Now, some more advice. If students have any suggestions, they should be encouraged to speak up. And I remember one of my first seminar discussions that I organized with my students, and I gave the floor, I gave the all students the autonomy to share their notes and express their opinions. And I received some feedback from the students. They suggested, can we do it slightly differently next time, rather than maybe 9 or 10 students negotiating together? Can we put them into breakout rooms? And I was happy to oblige. And I would also encourage to receive advice and suggestions from students. The next point, in busy periods of working from home, make sure you get outside for a break. So again, reiterating, don't spend too much time in front of the screen. Make sure you have regular breaks. And then finally, there's more to this, and you may think it's an easy ride, but you may well enjoy it. So final words of advice from myself. I would recommend tutors, EAP tutors, to keep things simple. Don't overcomplicate by using different applications. And there's a lot of online applications that tutors can access or for their students, but trying to keep things simple is probably the best approach, and slowly introduce different things over a period of time. I also found, as some of my tutors suggested in their survey, trying to communicate with students, and I found the best approach was to communicate to students before, explaining what was going to be happening either for the seminar discussion or the live catch-up session. Communicate with them during, and then at the end of the session, explaining what's going to be happening in the next few days or next week. And after the session itself, I provided an email and some information about what I told them during and what was expected of them over the next few days. So communication's vital, I found. Provide all necessary handouts and worksheets before the online session. So if you want the students to complete an activity, make sure you first email it to them, announce it on Canvas, and ensure that they have it during the live session. A lot of students, I found, either kept a digital record rather than printing out pieces of paper, and I encourage students to print out their notes so they were accessible rather than having to flip between different electronic devices. And then learn from your mistakes, be patient, and adapt, reflect as well. Okay. And that's the end of my session. Thank you ever so much. And I'll leave it to any questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Martin, for a very interesting presentation and for stepping in. We really appreciate it. There were actually lots of questions. So let me start. I'll start with the most recent one. So it was a question about how did you manage to communicate with students before or after? Was it via email or instant messaging? Did you give them lesson aims, etc.?
Mm-hmm. So before the lesson, yeah. As I mentioned before, mm-hmm. I emailed students with all the material that they needed before the class, or the aims of, or what was planned for the lesson. I also announced on Canvas, and they got a notification to say, okay, there's a notification, there's something that's been announced for our group. And I shared that on the Canvas announcements. So I felt that it was a sort of three-pronged approach. One at the end of the session, saying what's going to be happening in the next session, then emailing them, telling them again what's going to be happening, mm-hmm. and then announcing it through Canvas, mm-hmm. saying this is what's going to be happening. So telling them 3 times.
Exactly. Thank you. Phil was interested in finding out how you ensured that students spoke only English in the breakout rooms, when presumably not being monitored closely, and about student management.
Well, to ensure students were communicating in English, as the tutors suggested, they reiterated the importance of communication. So although this course is online and you may have students with the same L1 as you, when you come to the university or when you engage with the course online, if it's online, then it's important to engage with the course and the content post pre-sessional in English as a lingua franca. And I noticed, personally I noticed as I echoed those sentiments again and again over the course, students were finding their own confidence throughout, nearer towards the end, that they were willing to communicate to other students with the same L1. And I just entered the breakout rooms with my webcam off and my microphone off, just to get some insight into what they were discussing and any areas of feedback.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you.
Rebecca, oh, I think it was Rebecca. Rebecca was asking if students in China where Zoom was not possible, as in
did you have students in China where Zoom is not possible? I did have students from China, and I guess, I'm not entirely sure, but I believe there was some form of access to Zoom for registered students for the University of Sussex, and the Chinese accepted that access, or the Great Firewall of China, the Chinese authorities accepted that access. They also accepted access to the university library as well. So students were able to access Zoom as well as the university library.
Excellent. Gianni was asking if you could please give us some information about the timetable, how much synchronous or asynchronous learning was involved in assessments.
Sorry, can you just say that again? Do you?
I think if you could give us, yes, a little bit more detail about the timetable, like how much synchronous, how much asynchronous interaction was involved. Yes.
Okay, so offhand, I don't have the course aspects to hand at the moment, but I believe it was around 20 hours asynchronous for students to access and self-study. It was 2 catch-up sessions, about an hour and a half each, or that's how much I did, so about 3 hours synchronous, plus the seminar discussion for about an hour and a half each week, so 6, 7.5, plus the individual tutorials as well. So we were looking at maybe about 7 to 10 hours synchronous teaching per week.
Perfect. She was also asking about assessments, but I think, you know, you explained some of the aspects of it already, so that's perfectly fine. Tukche is asking, do you have any suggestions or comments for EAP writing in online contexts? Just wondering if Canvas has facility. She's not talking about individual tutorials to give feedback on writing.
Sorry, could you just say that again? You just broke down there, Penny. Sorry, Celia, you just broke down there. I didn't hear you.
Oh, sorry about that. Yes, so the question was, do you and more specifically in terms of Canvas and its facilities to support that?
Sorry, Celia, would you be able to write the question in the chat? I couldn't hear you. You broke down again. Very sorry.
Sorry about that. Just a moment.
That's okay.
I'm going to write it down. There we go. Here it is.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any? Okay, right. Now, EAP writing in online contexts. There was a lot of self-access material, recorded asynchronous sessions and aspects of different areas of EAP writing. I noticed going into the catch-up sessions, the synchronous sessions, that students needed a lot of support with their writing, and we looked at aspects of writing with the use of presentations. But I don't have any sort of suggestions or comments for writing in online contexts. Um, I try to encourage students to email me their writing with Word to ensure that they had access to Word as well, and then providing feedback through their writing or their drafting with Word, or commenting within their document and then emailing it back to them. That's the only suggestions I've got at the moment, but maybe it's an interesting area to look at as well in the future.
Okay. One recent question was, what were the students' feelings or levels of engagement, concentration within the 90-minute synchronous session?
It was initially, I had quite a few cameras off. They had their microphones on, and it took them, I suppose, that sort of internal confidence to start to switch on their webcams. So initially, it was okay, but as the course developed, they seemed to engage very, very well with the course, and they were willing to communicate. And I noticed on, tutoring some students, they actually created their own sort of social bubbles as well, like WeChat groups or that sort of thing, which was really interesting because tutors were doing that as well as students. So that I had no problems with engagement nearer towards the end of the course.
Shall we take one more question, one final question that just came?
Sure.
I think it's a good one as well, and it's good for teachers as well. So how can we encourage students in peer feedback in online education? I think a lot of people find this challenging. So, just your please, yes.
I believe I think you need to lead by example, I suppose, as an online tutor, and you need to give them maybe a sort of template to follow. If they're giving some feedback, if it's an online environment, maybe strengths of what a student has contributed, maybe things to think about in the future, and actions that they'll integrate for their next session. And if students can incorporate that sort of template in an online environment with the support of the tutor, I think then that would be useful. That would be in the right direction.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Martin. The final question was about the slides. Would you be happy to share the presentation slides with the audience?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll be happy to share the slides. I can create them as a PDF as well, and share them on the Padlet as well.
That would be great. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Panayota, Penny, would you like to join us?